Don't even think about asking us to change our plans once more. These tickets to see Elton John have been in our possession for a number of months. When my mother yelled, her voice reverberated across the hospital room where I was being treated. I was absolutely speechless as I sat there, clenching my phone with quivering hands. It was Christmas Eve in the Las Vegas Medical Center, and the only people present were myself, my twins Evan and Emma, who were 2 years old, and a nurse called Vanessa who was checking my vital signs. My mother's expression of indifference throughout the video chat was much more painful than the intense pain that I was experiencing in my belly, which felt like someone was twisting a knife inside of me. I introduced myself as Nata-lie Walker. I am 33 years old, and within my own family, I have always been the afterthought. This has been the case for as long as I can remember. In the view of my parents, my younger sister Jenna couldn't possibly do anything wrong. She was the golden kid. In the meantime, I was unable to convince them to care their one and only grandkids, while I underwent emergency surgery for problems due to the death of my spouse 6 months ago. My parents were only concerned with getting their concert tickets and spending Christmas Eve with Jenna. Despite the fact that the physicians had discovered internal bleeding that required emergency medical attention, the response that my father gave me was more profound than any surgical instrument could have been when I eventually begged for their assistance after I had exhausted all other possibilities. Natasha, you are turning into a true annoyance and a burden all the time. Currently, we are retired. We have earned the right to live our lives without continually dealing with your issues. I have been providing financial assistance to my parents ever since they decided to retire earlier than expected 3 years ago. Despite the fact that Jack had passed away, I continued to send them $2,500 each and every month to assist them with their mortgage and other expenditures. Having the belief that members of a family should help one another, I did it out of love and obligation. Exactly how naive I was. During the moment that my tears were falling quietly onto the hospital blanket, Vanessa gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze. Livia is a professional nanny who specializes in working with children who have experienced traumatic events. Allow me to call her on your behalf, she suggested, her generosity standing in stark contrast to the callousness of my parents. At that point in time, the twins were not old enough to comprehend what was taking place. Having already lost me in the vehicle accident, they now have the possibility of losing me as well if the surgery does not go as planned. It was a terrifying prospect, but it was not quite as terrifying as the idea of leaving children with someone who regarded them as burdens. I made my choice at that precise time, when I was experiencing excruciating pain all over my body, and my heart was being crushed by disappointment. And with those words, I began cutting the poisoned ties to the folks who had reared me, but never actually loved me. Yes, please contact her, I said Vanessa. And with those words, I began cutting the destructive relationships. As soon as I hung up the phone, a number of memories came flooding back to me. My upbringing was full of instances in which I was ignored, while Jenna was the center of attention throughout the entire course of everything. The fact that Jenna had been cast in a local commercial the same weekend that I graduated with honors from college was the reason why my parents scarcely acknowledged my accomplishment. The couple expressed their dissatisfaction with the location of the wedding, stating that it was too far away from their residence. Despite the fact that the twins were born, they only came to see them once, stating that the newborns were too fussy for their liking. From the beginning to the end, Jack had been my rock, having been alienated from his own father for a number of years. He was able to empathize with the anguish that comes with familial disappointment. In his words, "We'll build our own family, one that knows how to love." And that is exactly what we did. We created a cozy household that was full of laughter and acceptance. On the other hand, just 6 months ago, he was taken away by a drunk driver, leaving me to raise our children by myself, while also battling despair and bereavement. After experiencing a loss, I continued to provide assistance for my parents. When they acknowledged having difficulty keeping up with inflation, I further doubled the amount that was due each month. My goal was to surpass them and demonstrate that no matter what happens, members of a family should always be there for one another. The irony was quite disheartening. While I was bleeding internally and on the verge of passing away, they were unable to miss even a single concert in order to take care of my children. The word that her friend Livia would be arriving within the hour was brought back by Vanessa when she returned. I was reassured by Vanessa that she is wonderful with children. Before she started working as a private nanny, she had a job at a children's hospital where she helped children who had experienced trauma. I would like to know how much this will cost. A note of concern crept into my voice as I inquired. Because of the limitations imposed by Jack's insurance coverage, Jack's medical expenditures had already begun to accumulate. Not to worry about that at this time, Vanessa advised. Now let's concentrate on getting you ready for the operation. I was concerned, however. A thought occurred to me about the $2,500 that I was supposed to send to my parents the next week, which is money that might now be used to assist in paying for childcare instead. Something ignited within me. A flame of self-preservation that had been quenched many years ago. The thought lit something on the inside. Vanessa had made a guarantee that Livia would be compassionate, professional, and immediately bond with twins. When Livia arrived, she fulfilled all of those promises. A decision was made by me as the medical staff was getting me ready for operation. "Do you think you could bring my phone to me one more time?" I inquired of Vanessa. Both of my texts were sent out with trembling hands. The first step was to contact my bank and request that they stop making any more automated transfers to my parents' account. I addressed the second one to my parents. My financial assistance will no longer be provided in the future. More than being your afterthoughts, my children and I need to be treated with respect. Never get in touch with me again. In spite of the pain and the terror, I experienced a sensation that I had not anticipated: freedom. This occurred as they rolled me toward the surgery room. Even though the operation was successful, I was left feeling weaker than I had anticipated. I was grateful to Livia for going above and above by staying with the twins in my hospital room during the day and taking them to my apartment at night. I spent 5 days in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness, and I was thankful for her. In the midst of one of my more lucid moments, I became aware that my phone was flashing with notifications, that I had missed 27 calls, and that I had received numerous text messages from both my parents and Jenna. The majority of the communications followed a pattern that was easy to anticipate. First, they expressed confusion, then anger, and finally, they begged for their mortgage payment. They did not inquire about the twins' well-being or how my operation went at any point in time. I found the final communication that my father sent to be really illuminating. Suddenly cutting us off like this is not acceptable. This coming month we are going on a cruise, and unfortunately, the tickets are non-refundable. The messages transmitted by my sister were distinct. She appeared to be genuinely perplexed. My parents have informed me that you are about to undergo a relatively minor treatment. How are things going? I don't understand why they are so nervous about money. It suddenly occurred to me that my parents had lied to Jenna about the gravity of my position in order to rationalize their decision to attend a concert rather than spend time with their grandchildren. I made the decision to tell her the truth, and while I was still feeling hazy from the drugs, I sent her the entire tale. Very shortly, she gave her response. "Hello, Nata-lie? Oh my gosh." It was a surprise to me that it was an emergency operation. It was explained to me that you were just being too theatrical about a normal exam. If I had known, I would have observed the twins more closely. I truly apologize. I was fooled by her. Not at all unkind was Jenna. Her upbringing had recently been completed in a setting that instilled in her the need of putting her own requirements first. It's possible that this particular revelation will assist her in recognizing our parents for who they really were. By the time I was released from the hospital, I had already made a number of choices. I began by employing Livia on a part-time basis to assist me with the twins while I was recuperating. In the second step of the process, I hired a lawyer to create a will in which I designated a reliable friend to be the guardian of the twins in the event that something were to happen to me. This was not my parents. In the third step, I banned the phone numbers of my parents, enabling only Jenna to have restricted contact with me while I evaluated her sincerity. There were severe repercussions for my finances as a result of my decision. The payment of $2,500 that I had been giving to my parents on a monthly basis accounted for about a third of the money that I had been earning as a graphic designer. In the absence of that burden, I would be able to really afford appropriate childcare and possibly even begin the process of re-establishing the emergency fund that had been emptied following Jack's unfortunate passing. During that particular night, as I lay in my own bed with the twins sleeping in their room across the hall, I had a wide range of feelings. I was plagued by feelings of guilt, the ingrained conviction that I had done something wrong by prioritizing my own needs and the needs of my children. There was apprehension regarding the management of rehabilitation while simultaneously caring for 2 toddlers, but at the same time, an unaccustomed feeling of self-respect was beginning to take hold. There was a text message from Jenna that rang my phone. I just got into a substantial argument with my parents about the way in which they handled you. This evening, I will be staying at a hotel. Can we talk the following day? It's possible that I wasn't wholly alone myself after all. Over the course of 2 weeks following my operation, I was gradually regaining my strength. Even though the incision site continued to throb horribly whenever I moved too quickly, I was getting better at managing it with each passing day. Livia's arrival each morning to assist with the twins while I worked from home was a blessing that had been very much appreciated. The clients I worked with for graphic design were surprisingly tolerant about my limited availability, and I was thankful for the opportunity to complete my work from home, which enabled me to remain in close proximity to my children. The twins had received 2 visits from Jenna, during which she had brought nutritious meals and spent time with them. Initially, our chats were cautious. However, as time went on, she ultimately opened up about her own experiences with our parents. On one occasion, when we were watching the twins play, she revealed that they always gave the impression that you were making a conscious decision to keep your distance from the family. It never occurred to me that they were trying to take you away. A new aspect of my sister was beginning to emerge, one that had been concealed for many years due to the manipulation that our parents had exerted over us. Even though I wasn't yet ready to put all of my faith in her, I was grateful for the efforts that she made. After then, I heard the knock at the door, which I had been sort of anticipating. My parents were standing in the hallway when I looked through the peephole and saw them. At the same time that my mother was nervously gripping her luxury purse, my father was standing with his arms crossed and a familiar expression of displeasure imprinted on his face. When I finally opened the door, my heart was hammering, and I paused before opening it just enough to speak through the gap. "Do you have any desires?" When I asked, my voice was more steady than I had anticipated. My mother started out by saying, "Natasha, my darling, we have been so worried," and her kind tone immediately prompted me to raise my defenses. "As you have not been responding to our calls, we felt it necessary to check on you and the twins to ensure that they are doing okay." My response was as follows: "We are fine, if that is the only thing." My father interrupted me by saying, "It's not all," while he was slightly pressing on the door. "This awful financial position is something that needs to be discussed." When our mortgage payment was due, the bank called, and in order to pay for it, we had to take money out of our savings for the cruise. The brazenness was just astounding. There were no inquiries on my recuperation, and there was no care for their grandchildren. All they wanted was money. It was I who informed you that I was severing my financial links. I was serious about it. On the other hand, my mother pleaded with me, raising the pitch of her voice by an octave, that we have become dependent on that money. The promise that you made to assist us prompted your father and I to make adjustments to our way of life. "What is my commitment?" My voice echoed in incredulity. "In spite of the fact that you were unable to even supervise your grandchildren when I underwent emergency surgery, I have been giving money out of a sense of responsibility and shame." My father's expression became more gloomy. "Natasha, that is not a fair thing. We were making preparations. As my fury grew, I responded by saying that the plans were more essential than the safety of my children, and more important than my own life. Are you aware of what the physicians have to say? There was a possibility that I would not make it through that operation. Do you even bother to inquire about it? It was sufficient for them to remain silent. There was one error that we made. My mother whispered in a passionate manner. Is this the type of punishment you intend to impose on us? Mom, this is not a kind of punishment. As I spoke, I felt a peculiar sense of peace wash over me. This is the consequential effect. Since the beginning of my existence, I have been looking for your acceptance and support, and when I was in the most desperate need of assistance, you opted to purchase tickets to see Elton John rather than assist me. My father interrupted me and said, "We are your parents," the tone of his voice altering to demand respect. Additionally, I am a parent as well, I retorted. I would never handle Evan and Emma in the same manner that you have handled me. I never. At that very moment, Emma came into view while holding her toy giraffe in her arms. Almost immediately, my mother changed her strategy. She leaned down and cooed. "There's my precious grandbaby," as she remarked. The gifts were brought by Grandma. Emma retreated and looked at me with apprehension in her eyes because she was not familiar with these people who were considered to be relative strangers. "I believe it would be best for you to leave," I whispered. "Once I am ready to talk, if I am ever ready to talk, I will get in touch with you." The money, on the other hand, was begun by my father. I finished by saying, "It is no longer your concern," and then I gently closed the door. My mother and father came back the following morning with further reinforcements. My mother's sister, my Aunt Penny, who had always positioned herself as the family peacemaker over our entire family's history. "Natasha, honey, let's bring ourselves down to earth." Despite the fact that I had not opened my door, Aunt Penny pled with me from outside. "Without your assistance, your parents are having a difficult time." In response, I responded through the door that they had been managing their finances for decades prior to my beginning to assist them. Knowing that their money would not be sufficient, they decided to retire earlier than expected. Suddenly, I heard my mother's voice. "Because you had promised to assist us, we went ahead and made those choices. As a result of having to cancel our cruise, we are now in danger of losing the house." Now that I had taken a step back from the cloud of guilt that they had enveloped me with for years, their attempts to manipulate me were so obvious that I could see they were being successful. When did I ever make a pledge to provide support? For life. Following their retirement, I had promised to provide assistance on a temporary basis. Nevertheless, in some way, it had developed into an anticipated permanent arrangement. I'm recovering from major surgery and taking care of 2 toddlers, Mom and Dad. Please understand. I told them in a stern voice that this conversation was done before I walked away from the door, ignoring their persistent knocking and pleading. My father sent a group email to the entire extended family later that day, outlining how I had abandoned them in their time of need after they had sacrificed everything for me. The email was sent to the entire extended family. The email managed to neatly leave out their refusal to assist me with the twins when I was undergoing emergency surgery. Instead, it portrayed me as an ungrateful daughter who had abruptly severed our relationship without any apparent cause. They had not anticipated the response that they would receive. A response was given to the group by my cousin Michael, who lived in close proximity to my parents. He asked, "Uncle Robert, didn't you just buy a new boat last month? Also, Aunt Danielle, I was wondering if you were wearing a brand new diamond tennis bracelet when you were displaying it during Thanksgiving." Other members of the family also chimed in, and many of them sent me private messages to inquire about the complete account. When Aunt Penny found out the truth, she immediately called me to tell me immediately. She stated, "I was completely unaware of your surgical procedure. They informed me that you were just being dramatic about a regular operation, and that you were using it as a means of financially punishing another person. While this was going on, Jenna had completely come around to my point of view after seeing our parents' actions for herself. I just underwent emergency surgery with a considerable risk of complications, and she assisted me in crafting a single, truthful response to the family email thread. I simply stated that I had recently went through the procedure. Due to the fact that they were booking concert tickets, my parents declined to watch my children during this particular period. In order to avoid any further stress, I am currently concentrating on my rehabilitation and taking care of my twins. Following that, there was an enormous amount of support. Several home-cooked dinners were sent by the wife of Michael's cousin. My second cousin, whom I had just a passing acquaintance with, volunteered her services as a free babysitter on a part-time basis. Jenna began spending weekends in my apartment, where she was able to get to know her niece and nephew while also assisting me in recovering from my conditions. I was surprised to learn that Vanessa, who works at the hospital, put me in touch with a support group for young parents who have lost a spouse. Because their first meeting was done over Zoom, I was able to take part in it from the comfort of my own home. It was the first time since Jack's passing that I felt like I was actually understood by individuals who had been on my journey. The financial status of my parents, on the other hand, rapidly deteriorated. As a matter of fact, they had been living beyond their means, relying on my regular contributions to pay for their extravagant lifestyle that included frequent trips and expensive purchases. Jenna was surprised to learn that they had taken out a second mortgage on their home in order to purchase their yacht. She had assumed that I would continue to financially support their first mortgage for an endless period of time. Jenna was taken aback after assisting them in reviewing their financial situation at their request. She reported that they had been lying to everyone. They are not in a state of destitution. Rather, they have overspent. With the sale of the yacht and the vacation timeshare, they would be in good shape. Their voicemails and texts, which were becoming increasingly desperate, continued. But with each passing day, their grasp on me became less and less strong. I was constructing something new out of the ashes of their treachery, a true support network that was based on mutual caring rather than obligation. I had surgery 1 month ago, and then a very unexpected turn of events took place. In the mail, my parents received a notice of foreclosure. A mixture of concern and annoyance could be heard in Jenna's voice as she called to inform me. She went on to say that they are in a state of full terror. They have 60 days to make up for payment arrears, or else the bank will take possession of the house away from them. Do they have any money set up for retirement? The question was posed by me as I bounced Emma on my knee as Evan slept, mostly exhausted of resources. After spending a significant amount of money on the yacht, they put the remaining funds into a scheme that was suggested by Dad's golf pal. It was almost everything that they lost. Jenna let out a sigh. In no way am I suggesting that you should assist them, Natasha. Just felt you ought to be aware of this. In the later hours of that day, I received texts from both of my parents, who had abandoned all pretense of concern for my well-being and were now blatantly begging for money. In particular, the message that my mother sent was illuminating. We had no idea that you would truly cut us off for real. We presumed that you were simply upset, and that you would begin contributing money once more once a week or two had passed. I became enraged by their presumption that my boundaries were not genuine. Every single one of those years of putting their requirements ahead of mine and of putting up with their mistreatment. In no way had they ever shown any regard for me. While everything was going on, my own life was undergoing a series of unforeseen changes. I was able to connect with other parents who were going through similar struggles through the support group, which had become a lifeline for me. It was via them that I was introduced to Danielle, a real estate agent whose husband had passed away from cancer 2 years before, leaving her with a boy who was 3 years old. It was with her assistance that I was able to contemplate possibilities that I had not previously considered, such as selling my 2-bedroom apartment and utilizing the equity to relocate to a more inexpensive neighborhood that offered better childcare alternatives. I had also begun a small side business with the intention of constructing memorial websites, drawing inspiration from the website that I had developed for Jack. The word was getting out that some people in my support group had commissioned websites, and it was spreading. I experienced a sense of purpose that went beyond the simple act of surviving for the very first time since I became a widow. When they showed up abruptly at my flat once more, this time with a full spreadsheet of their obligations, the contrast between my development and my parents' breakdown became even more clear. My parents had just collapsed. My father emphasized that in order to prevent foreclosure and catch up on the mortgage, we need $14,000, and his normally authoritative tone was suddenly laced with desperation throughout the conversation. Because I was curious to hear their perspective now that they were actually facing consequences, I invited them in. I did not do so out of obligation. Rather, I did so because I was intrigued. "Why don't you consider selling the boat?" As I asked, I motioned for them to have a seat at the modest dining table in my home. It was my father's argument that we would suffer a loss. "What about the timeshare?" My mother soon added, "We have tried, but the market is terrible despite our efforts. Aside from that, those are the amenities we enjoy during our retirement." The ridiculousness almost made me laugh out loud. Luxuries that are out of your price range. "With your assistance, we would be able to purchase them," my father retorted, his tone becoming more adamant. "Following everything that we have done for you, this is the bare minimum that you could do. To be more specific, what have you done for me?" A question that hung in the air like a challenge was the one that I asked in a low voice. When the twins entered the room, they did so with Evan holding his beloved vehicle and Emma chatting merrily. They chose that particular moment to enter. The expressions on my parents' faces changed almost instantly. My mother cooed, "There are our precious babies," as she reached for Emma, who immediately fled beneath my legs with her right hand. "I made it clear that they are unfamiliar with you. Are you saying that you've seen them 3 times in their entire lives? You made the decision to abstain from participating?" In response, my father argued that this was not fair. "Most of us are really busy. I noticed that you were too busy to ask for money, but you were not too busy to ask for money. You were too busy to help your daughter through emergency surgery, yet you were too busy to ask for money. That ought to tell you everything there is to know about your priorities." I was no longer able to determine if the crumpled expression on my mother's face was the result of genuine sadness or intentional deception. In a low voice, she said, "We will lose everything if you do not assist us." Keeping my voice steady, I responded that I had lost my husband. "The father of my children has passed away. It was a success. You too will stay alive." Exactly 3 months after my operation, my parents were confronted with the unavoidable. They had no choice but to sell their home in order to prevent going into foreclosure. In spite of the fact that I kept my distance, Jenna managed to keep me informed about their condition. They had been successful in locating a small condo, which was a substantial modification from their beachfront property that was 4,000 square feet in size. My father had grudgingly sold his yacht at a loss, and they had ultimately unloaded the timeshare for a mere fraction of what they had purchased for it. During one of her weekly visits, Jenna shared with me that they are actually pointing the finger of blame at you for their financial issues in front of everyone. It's a strange thing to watch. When you promise to assist them for the rest of their lives, they tell anybody who will listen that you have abandoned them. My response was, "Let them talk," and I was unexpectedly unbothered by their words. There is no need to explain the truth. It did, in fact. My extended family had, for the most part, come together in support of me after they learned the whole tale. After hearing of their failure to assist me during my surgery, even my father's sister, who had always taken his side in family fights, contacted to show her support. She had always been quite supportive of him. While everything was going on, my own circumstances had significantly improved. My support group member Danielle assisted me in locating and purchasing a modest property with 3 bedrooms that was located in a community that was welcoming to families. Due to the fact that the mortgage payments were actually lower than the rent that I had been paying for my apartment, the twins were able to play in the backyard for the very first time in their lives. Because my side company of developing memorial websites had expanded to the point where I could minimize the number of clients I had for graphic design, I was able to concentrate on work that felt more important. Although Livia continued to assist, with childcare on 3 days each week, I had changed my schedule in order to spend as much time as possible with Evan and Emma. First and foremost, I had finally discovered a community. Cauliflower was delivered to us by our neighbors when we moved here. There were play dates scheduled by the support group. We no longer considered Jenna to be a rival for our parents' devotion. Rather, she had evolved into a genuine sister. There were even times when Vanessa, who worked at the hospital, would come by with her children. Even though I had severed my ties with my parents and had lost my marriage, I nevertheless managed to feel less isolated than I ever had before. My mother wrote me a letter, which I got 6 months after my operation. It was a letter that was actually handwritten. I was on the verge of leaving it unopened, but my curiosity ultimately won out. I had never seen anything like that before, and it was indoors. This is a sincere apology. In her letter, she stated, "I have had time to reflect on my behavior. I have been forced to confront some hard realities about myself as a mother, as a result of monitoring you as you construct a life without our assistance. I admired your self-reliance and found myself envious of your tenacity. Despite the fact that I needed my own mother, it seemed as though you did not need me as much as I did. I now see that you did require my services, but not in the manner in which I had hoped to be required. You were reaching out to us when you requested us to care for the twins while you were undergoing surgery, and we absolutely failed to meet your expectations. My sincere apologies." Following this, the letter continued by elaborating on how they had fully reorganized their financial situation. There was a hardware store in the neighborhood where my father had taken a part-time job. They were living a more humble lifestyle for the first time in decades, having sold the most of their collections of luxury objects. The only thing she asked for was an acknowledgement of her apologies. She did not seek for money or even pardon. After presenting the letter to Jenna, she expressed her skepticism. For weeks, they had been discussing the possibility of writing to you. At first, my father was opposed to it. However, I believe that he is beginning to change his mind about it as well, particularly following the heart scare that he experienced a month ago. Is your heart frightened? Concerned despite my own feelings, I inquired. It was little more than chest aches and high blood pressure, but it frightened him. Jenna said that while he is currently on medication, he is actually following the doctor's orders. I believe that realizing his own mortality has made him more modest. It was not possible for me to provide a fast response to the letter. I required some time to work out my emotions. Was this truly sincere contrition? Or was it just another attempt at manipulation? Is it possible that they had actually changed? Or were they merely adjusting their methods? That evening, I looked at old photographs of my family for the very first time since I severed contact with them. In the midst of the happy smiles, I noticed patterns that I had previously been oblivious to. Over the course of their lives, my parents had always been performers, acting out the role of ideal parents while putting their own requirements first. 1 year following my operation, I, at long last, consented to see my parents at a neutral site, which turned out to be a quiet cafe close to my new residence. It was difficult for me to recognize them when they arrived. My father's arrogant posture was replaced by a more humble manner, and he appeared to be smaller than he actually was. Simple, functional clothing had been substituted for the fancy garments that my mother had been wearing. Jenna spent the afternoon with the twins, who were his children. I was not yet prepared to attend a family gathering at that time. When my father finally did something that had never been done before, we sat in awkward quiet. He shed tears. It was with a broken voice that he said, "I have been a terrible father, and even worse, I have been a terrible grandfather. While I do not anticipate your forgiveness, I would like you to know that I am aware of it at this moment, how self-centered we have become." My mother extended her hand across the table, but before she really touched my hand, she made a gesture in that direction. "We have been in family therapy for a number of months," she explained. At first, we were resistant to Jenna's notion, but now that we've given it some thought, transformative in nature, it took me some time to forgive them, and I didn't make any promises that I couldn't keep. Instead of that, I I told them about our new life and shared some images of the twins with them. They listened without interrupting, and they did not make it about themselves, which may have been the first time in their entire lives. My father gently inquired, "Would it be possible for us to meet our grandchildren at some point in the future?" as we were parting ways. My response was based on extensive consideration of this matter. Your actions, not your words, will determine the outcome of this. It is possible for us to begin with brief sessions that are supervised if you are truly dedicated to making changes. It is important to keep in mind that my children will only choose to form relationships with others who respect their mother. Leaving that encounter, I did not feel the heavy weight of obligation, nor did I feel the burning resentment that had characterized our relationship for such a long time. In its place, I experienced something anew. The calm assurance of a woman who was aware of her own worth, who had established boundaries, and who would not apologize for enforcing those boundaries to others. As a girl who was yearning for acceptance, I had already converted into a mother who was ferocious in her protection and clear in her demands. It remained to be seen whether my parents could actually change, but I had already completed this transformation.